Okay guys, welcome back to another video. So this is going to be one of my more sort of different videos. This is going to be about, sorry I might just open the window quickly actually. Yeah, sorry, it's laying the cool air for this video. So this is going to be about learning languages, which is something I haven't talked so much about on this channel, but I think it's really part of a rich life to learn languages. So yeah, this is important stuff, I think, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. So for the past 3 years, I have been studying there have been breaks in between, but I've been, aside from my university work, I've been studying Latin. Actually, it's probably past 2 years. Past 2 years I've probably been doing it. And I've been adopting a very, what would you call it, unorthodox way of learning this language. So I went through school and I learned it in like the classic way of just memorising grammar and verb forms and all of this, and then translating texts at like a very slow rate, where you were sort of looking things up in a dictionary, you know, sort of reciting forms to yourself. So it was like, oh, what are we? Oh, what's that? Oh, you know, porto, portas, patats, you know, like Thomas, you know, like that kind of thing. And it's like, oh, third person singular, indicative, active, passive, or whatever. You know, it wouldn't be that. Indicative, subjunctive, active, or whatever, you know, like really rigorous knowledge of the grammar. And I wouldn't change that for the world, guys, because I love that stuff. I find it really interesting. But I found that when it came to actually learning the language itself, it was horrendous for actual, like, understanding the language. Didn't really help you to know that portabat is the third person singular imperfect active indicative of Porto, you know. There you go, I can still do it. It doesn't really help you to know any of that, because all you need to know is it's I carry in the it's like he carries in the past tense. It's just he carries. That's all you really need to know. So anyway, I found that this didn't really set me up for reading Latin literature, which is what I really wanted to do. Like, I loved the sound of Latin poetry. I loved, you know, I just thought it was really cool I loved the idea that it was sort of a voice from the past, that you were reading exactly what had been written, you know, thousands of years ago, like literally thousands of years ago, in a language, just a remote language that no one ever speaks anymore. That just gives me sort of goosebumps to this day, right? So anyway, having become disenfranchised with the traditional method of learning Latin, I turned to my own resources, and I started doing what you would call just mass consumption of content in the language. So, like, in the library, there's a kind of section of, in the university library, there's a section of like the ancient Greek and ancient Roman literature in Latin, and I just like rent out like a bunch of books and like no one ever used them. So I just kept them basically, and then no one ever asked them back. I've got to hand them in before I leave university. But I just got, see, I'll show you this kind of stuff here. Like these kind of books here. I just got fuck tons of them. Like, this is Cornelius Nepos. This is Cicero's Letters. Ovid's Art of Love. Cicero's speeches, you know. And I would just read through these. Now, you know, I can read Latin well, but not that well, you know. So I couldn't actually understand very much of what I was reading in these texts because they were so advanced, right? They're really high level, like literary pieces of work. So a lot of it didn't really make a lot of sense to me when I was reading it. But I believed in the process of, if I read this enough, I'm going to eventually understand it, because that's how language acquisition works. And so this happened for about a year. I was just doing this. And then I hit, about a year in, I was like, okay, like, this is taking longer than I thought to understand this. I still wasn't really understanding what I was reading. Like, I could identify it a lot better. Like, I could sort of, I didn't have to decode it in the same way. Like, I kind of understand the general flow of the sentence much more easily. Like, I sort of expected the verb to come at the end of the sentence. And like, if it was a relative clause, it just kind of recognised how the language fit together most naturally. Which is really good, right? But I still wasn't really getting what I wanted out of it. It was still too slow. And eventually I thought, this is ridiculous, like, I need to do something else. So I decided to downgrade the level I was reading at. So I downgraded to kind of easier works of literature. I don't know if I still got it, but I might have given it back. But I had a copy of Attic Nights, which is a very simple book about Latin grammar, which is probably very boring for most people, but I actually found it really just interesting anyway. So I actually didn't mind reading about just really obscure parts of Latin grammar, and some of this I could actually understand quite well. And this was like, oh, I'm getting somewhere finally. But I finished it, and then I didn't really find that I didn't really know to do what I was going to do after that. I tried reading I went back to sort of simple poetry like Ovid and stuff. Still too difficult, so I didn't really feel like I was quite making the leap yet. And then I went and bought, which I still have, went and bought the Latin Bible. So this is basically, I guess Latin sort of became the sacred language of the Catholic Church, much like people sing Arabic, like the Quran in Arabic and in mosques and stuff. Like, I guess the liturgical language is the right word, right? That Latin was kind of that for the Catholic Church, right? Which I always find quite interesting. So yeah, I just bought the Bible in Latin, and yeah, I started reading that, because the thing about the Bible is I'm not like religious or anything, but the thing about the Bible is it's very simple. It's written very simply, and the problem with it was I just wasn't that interested with it, and it was still kind of. I still thought like I'm not really interested in this while I'm reading, and it's still quite hard anyway. Like, there's a lot of words that I still don't really understand. So then I degraded even more to this. So this is actually a course this textbook that I use on my course, which is Familia Romana, which is like a kind of very basic sort of Latin stories in Latin, basically. And again, I enjoyed it. I was learning a lot of Latin from it because it was very simple, but it was too easy, and I just wasn't really getting very excited by it. And at this point, I finished my Latin exam. And I always thought I was going to study Latin up until my last Latin exam, and then that was it. I'd stop studying Latin after that, and then I'd move on to something else. I was thinking maybe Russian, maybe get back to Italian. I decided to get back to Italian, and so this is where my journey comes to an end with Latin, for now, because I've just sort of concluded that it's just I've done what I've set out to do, the kind of experiment of studying it with sort of reading textbooks, reading content, consuming content in the language, for 2 years, and whether it's just really hard, whether, and I'm just being impatient, or whether I've not adopted the right techniques, I haven't found the right techniques. I think it's run its course to a point now where it's right for me to move on to something else. Because the one thing I think about Latin is, and this goes for all ancient languages, is a lot of what attracts me to languages generally, you just don't get. Now, there's the amazing thing of like the hand reaching through history and you sort of reaching yours, right? That is pretty amazing. Cicero wrote these speeches, and now we're just reading them in his exact words. There's something amazing about that. What really, when I first got into languages properly, what really excited me about it was the fact that you could communicate in it, and you could hear it. There's a lot of work about how Latin's pronounced, and how, and it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. Like, there are some really nice readings of Latin texts. There are some really beautiful ancient Greek texts. There's this guy, I think he's called Podium does some amazing ancient Greek readings, like really stellar stuff. Anyway, so there is a bit of that, but it's not as natural. There's always a slight gap there for me with Latin and sort of reading it, and while it comes with these other positives, I think part of why I'm decided to move on to another language is because I know that I can get the whole one of the big things that I'm excited about studying a language for is like that thing of just communicating it and like being able to have like a good accent in a language, and sort of hearing it on the street or whatever, all that kind of stuff. You don't really get that with Latin. So my plan is to probably study Italian for the next 6 months, and I'll get to a point where I will come back to Latin. Maybe it will be 6 months' time, maybe it will be several years before I get back to it. I think when I do get back to it, I want to be in a position where I really understand language learning much better from having learnt other written languages. Because I think that's the best way that I'm going to understand learning languages. Because I think that it's kind of easier to really learn a written language, a sort of spoken language really well. And then I can apply that to learning Latin. So that's my plan. Funnily enough, actually, I got there's like they do Harry Potter in Latin, which is something that I literally got like a couple of days before. I just bought it online, like a couple of days before my last Latin exam. So which I think is rather a shame because I haven't actually properly read it yet. But it's something to look forward to when I get back to studying Latin in the future. But yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it? Like, yeah, cool stuff. So anyway, guys, this is my sort of experience of studying Latin. Obviously, I've just realised the title of this video says I've studied Latin for 10 years, which is actually true because I took it up in school when I was like 12 years old, and I'm now 22. So quite symbolically, now I'm giving it up 10 years later. Yeah, it's a hard language, guys. It's a hard language. But anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.